who's watching the town while everybody's here? That's what I want to know. Thanks so much for coming out on a rainy, cold night to hear us. I really appreciate it. It really demonstrates a lot of interest in the community. And special thanks to the Deale Area Historical Society, Peggy in particular, for all the work that they did in organizing and planning and preparing this, from projectors to refreshments. They just did a terrific job. So, this was the last place I'd expected I would find myself on November 2nd. How did I get into this? A few months back, I bought a watercolor painting at our local consignment shop, Second Wind Consignments, excellent little shop, of a house. The painting was of a house on Rodgers Creek, and it reminded me of the house that we had bought on Rodgers Road. And I wanted to know a little more about the history of that house, so I contacted the Historical Society. And Gail, is Gail here?
We're having trouble hearing you, some people.
Okay, I'll speak up a little more.
Yeah.
Okay. Is Gail here? Gail Moreland? She didn't make it tonight anyway. Gail Moreland,
Her two sisters are here.
okay. Gail Moreland, one of the members of the Deale Area Historical Society, and I'd met before, was able to tell me exactly what the origin of the house, who lived there, and all that. It was terrific assistance. But it spurred my memory that years before, in the house that we had bought, that we took us several years to replace, we had found documents, pictures, history of the house, and thought that it was way too important to let it spoil. So we made some electronic copies. And so I thought, well, gosh, I ought to go take a look at that. I hadn't thought about it in years. And as I started to go through it, I realized what a terrific story it told about the people, the house, and the community. Started to put it together in a Word document and shared it with the Deale Area Historical Society to get their input and get some other ideas. And they suggested that we do this tonight to try to encourage other folks that might be in a similar circumstance to try to explore their own home's history and in the community. So this presentation tonight should take about an hour. I know that there's some key contests going on, there's some elections going on, and there's also perhaps the deciding game of the World Series in 809. So we'll try to keep this on track. And one of the comments I was going to write in here was, please ask me to either speak up or speak down. It sounds like they already want me to speak up some, and I'll try to do that. If anybody needs me to speak louder, just raise your hand and I'll try to do so. Slide, please. So, as fascinating as I found the history as I researched it, it really was, I think, typical of life in our country in general, and this community in particular. A profile in American history, if you will. Also, as a side note, I originally had titled this presentation An Incomplete History, because it is just that. I know that everything that I have found is nowhere near the whole history. When I met with the Deale Area Historical Society a couple of months ago to discuss the presentation with them, I learned several things that night just sitting around their table, and I'm sure it's going to be true tonight. So if you have something that you want to volunteer that's incorrect or needs to be added to, please let us know. So tonight what we're going to talk about is the history of the Howes family on Broadwater Creek, the history of the Rodgers Road farm, and then we'll finish tonight with select points of life in Churchton past. Slide, please. So throughout the presentation tonight, I'll be evoking the memories, views, and experiences of Naomi Howes Nutwell, which were so emblematic and reflective of the times and the people. For example, Naomi recounted the times that they were when she was born as such. It was a simpler time, a time of love and trust and hope in the future. No one had ever heard of youth on drugs, the atomic bomb, or putting men on the moon. Along the quiet waters of Broadwater Creek, in the house I have lived in all my life, I was born on a sunny Thursday afternoon, May 18th, 1922, to Tom and Maggie Howes. My half-sister Edna, who was 10 years old, told me she came home from Churchton school to find Dr. George Dent, Eliza Randall, Grandmother Evans, and me. Slide, please. So if you read Naomi Howes Nutwell's obituary, you'd learn that she was a lifelong resident of Churchton and spent her whole life at her Rodgers Road home. Also that Naomi attended Deale and Churchton schools and graduated in 1937 from the 8th grade, which was the highest grades that the schools offered. But those of you that may have known her know that there was much more to Naomi. Sadly, we never got a chance to meet her as she had moved from the house before we bought it, and she was unable to attend settlement. But she left behind at least some of her writings and photos of the house that were retrieved years later by her son, Alan. We had a chance to read some of her poignant accounts and feel we got to know her better, at least somewhat through those. What I read told me that Naomi was a woman with tremendous appreciation of life, faith, family, and friends. That she viewed herself as extremely fortunate and rich, not materially, but in ways that mattered much more to her. As I delved into her writings and then also researched as much as I could on her family and the other Churchtonians, I felt that the values such as hers permeated the whole community. People like those of you in the room tonight and your families and your ancestors that have made this such a strong community. Slide, please. So Naomi and her son Alan were the last of the Howes family on the north side of Broadwater Creek. The Howes were a very prevalent family in the Broadwater Creek area for generations, about 200 years. The original farm that she lived on, about 19 acres when her father bought it in 1917, was down to less than 3 acres by 1997. The rest having been divided among family and later sold off to others. The house she was born in was still here. Having been built about 1885, it had fallen into disrepair due to age and shortage of cash to maintain. Nonetheless, she and her son Alan lived in the house she loved until she was almost 90. Due to her health and poor conditions of the house, she very reluctantly sold it to us in July of 2012, and Naomi sadly died 21 days later. Slide, please. So for our discussion tonight, this 1860 map of Anne Arundel County and the inset may help us set the stage. The blue square, of course, is where we are tonight in this area of the county. And this area is where the Howes farms were. This front here, the eastern edge of this peninsula, if you will, were the Howes. There was one here, and then this is where Tom Howes' place was. This is Ford's Island. So this is 1860 at the height of the Howes farms. Ford's Island is all but gone now, but it played an important part of their lives in that era. Slide, please. So, this amazing, carefully hand-drawn, detailed map of the Broadwater Creek area in the 1920s provided more historical context than I could have ever found on the internet. I'll refer to it several times tonight, and I think you'll find it helpful as we tie this all together. And I also brought about 50 copies that y'all are welcome to have a copy of when we're done. The Howes farms on Broadwater Creek were on the east end of the peninsula, so this is a different orientation. This is north, or the top of the thing is east. These were the Howes farms here and here, and then eventually Tom was down here at the point of Broadwater. Naomi recounted the stories of their farms. The family home was on the shore near the bend of the creek, having a wonderful view of the Chesapeake Bay. Looking across the island, which provided a good harbor as it was really a peninsula running back to Deale Beach. The water was very deep along the shore in those days, and large sailing vessels, skipjacks, anchored there. I remember as a child we caught the best and largest hard crabs along the channel at the river bend with hand lines. During the years, the bay waters have washed the island or peninsula until it is only a marsh now. But my grandfather used to cut the marsh grass on it for hay to feed his cattle. And there was a high bank at the end with locust trees with several graves beneath them of men found drowned there. This is the area that she's talking about. Slide, please. So for perspective, this is a current shot of Broadwater Creek. This is all that's left of Ford's Island. As you can see, it's largely succumbed to the erosive effects of the Chesapeake. Can everybody see? Okay. Everybody hearing okay?
Yeah.
Okay,
I can hear.
good. Slide,
I'm
please.
excited.
So, 3 Howes brothers had come from Massachusetts in the late 1600s, according to Naomi, and settled in northern Calvert and southern Anne Arundel counties. The family lore that she was able to pass on in detail went as far back as 3 generations before her. Naomi's great-grandparents were Robert F. Howes and Mary Ann, or known as Miss Ann, Rourke Howes. They were married July 24th, 1845, and they had 8 children. Both are now buried at Woodfield Cemetery in Galesville. Their farm was at the Broadwater Road waterfront area that we just saw. Originally, they were buried there in the family plot, but when the land was sold to build homes, the house was torn down, and they moved the remains from the family plot to the Woodfield Cemetery in Galesville and Friendship United Methodist Church in Friendship about 1920. Naomi wrote of her great-grandmother, Miss Ann. My great-grandmother was called Miss Ann by her neighbors, who called on her when illness came, as she knew the art of making medicine and salve from herbs and bark, and brought many a new life into this world. Dad said that when he and his brother Rob were young boys, they loved to go across the field to her home in the late evenings. As they shelled corn for her chickens or other tasks, she delighted them with her stories as she spun her flax on her spinning wheel. At age 89, she was laid to rest beside her husband in the family plot on the banks of the creek she had lived so long and raised her family of 8 children. So of the 8 children, 4 remained on separate farms on Broadwater Creek. Eliza, John Henry, which is Naomi's grandfather, R. Frank, and Cornelia, or known as Neely. Thomas died young at 20, and both Josephine and Mary married and moved to the Eastern Shore. I was unable to find anything on Kate's life. Slide, please. So John Henry House, Sr., Naomi's grandfather, married Mary E. Tucker, the daughter of James and Charlotte Randall Tucker, on February 14th, 1885, Valentine's Day. I was wondering when I saw that, I thought it went back that far. When I looked at it up on the internet, it actually goes back to 1500 somewhere where St. Valentine was associated with love. Mary died when Thomas was 5 and Rob was 3. But Thomas told Naomi he remembered her playing the accordion and singing to them, and she is also buried in Woodfield. Slide, please. After the death of his wife, Mary Tucker, John Henry House Sr. married Lily Lee Owens Oram on June 29, 1892. They had 8 children, 3 who died in infancy, and the following: William J. Howes, Charles Clifford Howes, and Enoch Henry Howes. Charles and Enoch were twins. Lily May Howes Monson, and Reuben Lambert Howes. Slide, please. They lived at a farm that had been part of the original Broadwater Point farm. That house burned down when it was left idle. Second wife Lily had moved to Annapolis with her daughter Lily May when John Henry Sr. died in 1924, and the surviving sons had also grown up and moved. Naomi described John Henry's house as such: when my grandfather married, he was given a parcel of the original farm for his house, in the hollow near the mouth of the creek across from the island. There, under a grove of oak trees, he built his home, painted yellow with brown trim, and a dairy house. Surrounding it was a white picket fence. On the shore, he had a workbench under a large oak tree, and when my father was a young man, grandfather built for him a sailboat they named Fox, after the boat that had sailed across the Atlantic in 1886, the year of Dad's birth. Father prized that boat and kept it until his death at age 63 and willed it to his son John. Slide, please. This photo shows where John Henry's house stood, which would have been in this area. This is Eliza's house. The original farm, Robert F. and Miss Ann's house would have been over here, which was later occupied by one of the brothers. And then over on this, we can't see a bit off on the screen here, would be Cornelia's farm across the Broadwater Creek farms. Note that this picture was taken from Ford's Island, which is all but gone now. Slide, please. So, all 3 of the surviving male children of John Henry Howes and second wife Lily Lee Owens Howes served in World War I. Reuben, who is not pictured, served in the U.S. Navy and must have not been any older than 15. He was born in 1903 and the war ended in 1918, so he somehow or other managed to get enlisted at no more than 15. Enoch and Charles served in the Army. While Reuben and Enoch survived the war, Charles was killed in action in France. In this picture, it's very difficult to see, but I'm almost certain that this is the Statue of Liberty on the right, which was, New York City was a point of embarkation for many of the soldiers that were headed overseas. Slide, please. So Charles Clifford Howes was killed in action on October 15, 1918, about midway through the massive Allied offensive known as the Meuse-Argonne Campaign, which ended with the armistice that concluded World War I on November 11, 1918, which is now known as Veterans Day. Historians say it was the bloodiest battle in U.S. military history, claiming the lives of 26,000 Americans and wounding 95,000. Twice as many died there than the next most costly battle, the World War II fight for Okinawa, which claimed 12,900 lives, according to historians. 14,000 American men, most of them killed in the battle, are buried at the Meuse-Argonne American Cemetery, one of which is Charles Clifford Howes. There's also an inscribed marker for Charles at Woodfield in the Howes area that denotes his service. And interestingly, this is the battle that is depicted in the movie Sergeant York. It starred Gary Cooper. York became the most decorated soldier of World War I, and his heroic feats occurred just about 25 miles west of where Charles was fighting and died. Slide, please. So both sons of John Henry Howes Sr. and his first wife, Mary Tucker Howes, were already in their early 30s in 1918 and did not serve in World War I. John Henry Robb Howes Jr. had married Alice Ford Howes, daughter of Mag and John Ford, on April 11, 1912, and they had already had a son and a daughter by then. Thomas Howes, Naomi's father, had married Katie First on July 13, 1918, in Dunkirk, Maryland. Naomi said that they had their wedding dinner on the steps inside the house at Rodgers Road, which was the farmhouse that we bought, because they did not yet have a dining room table. And the steps in that house were extremely narrow, so it must have been a very difficult task to do. They were about 6 or 7 inches wide. Naomi wrote of Katie. Her family lived on Stricker Street in Baltimore. In the era of steamboats coming to Chalk Point, several local residents took in boarders. She, her sister Annabelle, and brother Grover First were frequent boarders at Miss Maggie Franklin's home and became good friends to the church and family gatherings with many local residents. Before her marriage, she worked in a shirt factory in Baltimore. Our parlor organ was hers, and Dad said she was very talented. She lived about 2 years, and when she became ill, Dad took her to a hospital in Baltimore, and she was buried at Loudon Park Cemetery in Baltimore. Thomas then married Margaret Evans Smith in 1921, and they had 4 children: Mildred Naomi Howes Nutwell, John William Howes, Mary Elizabeth Boots Howes Rodgers, and George Thomas Howes. Slide, please. So like Tom Howes, Maggie had been married before and was widowed. Her first husband was Edward Smith, who had died in 1915 from infections of injuries sustained in a fall. They had 2 children. Mary Elizabeth only survived 8 months, and then Edna Mae Smith, who lived on Rodgers Road with her half-siblings, and later married Robert Welsh and moved to Deale. Slide, please. So Tom and Maggie raised their 5 children on the 19-acre farm on Rodgers Road. Tom was both a waterman and a farmer. All these pictures are from the 1920s. The shed behind Maggie here, which you can't read the caption, it says Maggie Howes feeding her chickens. It was on the northwest side of the house, along with several smaller sheds, and was being used for storage. And you can just barely see the barn here in the background that was on the farm. You'll see a better picture of it there. But this is Naomi and John when they were children. Slide, please.
Vince,
Yes.
the little girl over in the corner, that was Aunt Emma. She didn't want a picture taken.
Over here?
Yep. She didn't want a picture taken. Sounds like her, doesn't it?
Very good.
I qualified that because you called her aunt. Did you call?
Aunt Emma?
Aunt Emma.
Right.
Alma.
Yes,
Okay.
which was Aunt Naomi.
Naomi.
Yes.
Okay. Slide, please.
Sorry.
That's great.
No, that's
Perfect.
good.
This is a nice family photo about 1932. That's actually Cape Ann in the background before it was developed. Edna Mae is not pictured, but would have been about 20 years old, and I think she may have been married by then. I'm not sure. Slide, please. Edna Mae Smith Welch was Naomi's half-sister and lived in Deale, having married Robert Owen Welch. They had 2 children, Nellie Marie, who married John Winston and begat daughter Evelyn, and Emily Maud, who married Paul Simmons and begat son Robert. Edna Mae Smith and Robert Owen Welch are buried at the Evans Family Cemetery, Vacation Lane in Deale. However, there is also a headstone for Edna at the Woodfield Cemetery in the Howes family area. Does anybody know Edna? Do you know where she's actually buried, since there's 2 headstones? Okay. Slide, please. So, all 4 children of Tom and Maggie Howes would eventually live side by side on Broadwater Creek. Naomi inherited 1097 Rodgers as the eldest child of Thomas Howes. Naomi married Alan McLean Mac Nutwell in 1948. He was the son of Alfonso Franklin Nutwell Sr. Mac's mother was Julia Adela Sherbert Nutwell, who lived to be 112 years old. Robin, what did you share with me about their arrangement? They were tenant farmers and they rented their home. What was the arrangement with the landlord?
The mother of the family that owned the farm, when she died, they had to sell the house, and they had a contingency clause that Mama Della could live there until she died, and no one had a clue at that point that she was going to live there. Oh, wow.
Mary Elizabeth Boots Howes Rodgers married George Ellsworth Rodgers in 1945. George Ellsworth Rodgers was the son of Laura E. Ward Rodgers, the daughter of Hezekiah Ward, who built 1097 Rodgers Road, and he was also the son of John Henry Rodgers. They lived with Miss Laura Rodgers until they built their own home at 1079 Rodgers, now the Scala's home. Boots and Els had no children. George Thomas Howes married Betty Mae Davis in 1947. That must have been a very popular name in 1947. A name like that. They had no children. They divorced in 1951. He died of leukemia at age 47 in 1975. He lived in Churchton at 1085 Rodgers Road and worked for Goodyear Tire at the Washington, D.C. Greyhound Terminal. John William Howes married Mary Margaret Goddard in 1946. They lived in Churchton at 1087 Rodgers Road and had 5 children. And I've had the opportunity to talk with 2 of the children recently, both Marie and Ed, and Marie is here tonight. I'll share one story. The reason I got to meet Marie, it's a bit of an interesting story, but when they cut the driveway at the new house that we were building, it disturbed the dirt. I was walking the driveway with the fellow that was going to install it, the dirt, and saw something shiny and picked it up. Turned out it was a class ring from 1975 Southern High School. And I cleaned off the dirt a little bit and could see that there were initials inside, ELH. And I figured this is probably H for Howes. So I called Southern High School and they referred me to someone that they thought could help me, who turned out to be a Nutwell, and told her who I was, what I had found, and could she help me find out who would have the initials ELH, probably a Howes, 1975. She says, "Oh, I've been to your house. That belonged to Ed Howes. He lived next door. He was John and Mary's son." So she knew right away who it was, but she didn't know where he was or how to get in touch with him, but she said that she could put me in touch with his cousin, another Ed Howes who lived across the creek, who I'd actually met on a bike ride once. So I called the other Ed Howes and left a message, told him who I was, why I was calling. He called me back that night. He goes, "Oh, I remember the day we lost that ring, half a century ago. We were out front playing football, and we looked for that thing for hours." He still was not able to tell me where it was. And so when I got involved in this project, Marie's name came up. I reached out to Marie. She thought I was a crank caller. But she was able to get me hooked up with Ed, and we got the ring returned. So he was very pleased about that, and that little piece of history went full circle.
And he's very excited to get it back.
So next slide, please. So Marie's dad is John, and this is the view outside of our front door right now. This is John William Howell's workshop, which is still at 1087 Rodgers Road. And Naomi had a very poignant account of the construction of this particular building. She wrote, February 15th, 1968, as I looked out my kitchen window this morning, I saw a dream coming true. Last week, during a few warm days, my brother John had the foundation dug for what will be a workshop. But it is a dream that took place over 20 years ago in the heart of John, to have his own shop to build boats, cupboards, and many useful items. Having inherited a love of carpentry from both grandfathers, as a child he helped Uncle Rob build crab boxes, fixing boats, and once built Mother a rowboat. In those days, power tools were unknown in this area. All sawing and fitting was by hand tools. When John finished school, 8th grade at Deale School, he went to work at Captain Dick Harchey's boatyard as a helper. While doing his job as a helper, sweeping shavings and holding the material for the experienced carpenters, his keen eyes and alert mind quickly learned the art of measuring exact fits, joining parts, and taking pride in the finished boat. He learned that boat building trade and earned the rating as a first-class builder. With his carpentry skills, he applied his knowledge to making things for his home, which led to cabinet making, sometimes in his attic or in a neighbor's shop if available. It goes to prove that a dream can be realized with patience, hard work, and determination. It could not happen to a more deserving person. So Marie, when I spoke to you, you told me how your dad used to get to work, which...
Yeah, he'd hitchhike to Chalk Point and go down and row a boat across to get to Gainesville.
So it's about-
walk or hitchhike.
3 miles, a little over 3 miles if you had to walk it that day and then take the boat across just to get to work. So tremendous work ethic.
He also, when we had a cinder block house that his cousin Bobby House helped build. And then he added on to it. So it took forever to have it finished. And so before it was finished, it had a big picture window, but he actually built a rather large rowboat in the living room. And they took it out the front window.
Not bad. Right, slide please. So, in addition to the interesting story of the Howells on Broadwater Creek, the Rodgers Road farm also had an interesting background. Thomas Howells had bought the house from Hezekiah Ward on March 3rd, 1917, and received the deed on April 30th, 1919. The property that he purchased was 18.57 acres, and it costs, and the house as well, and it costs $1,000. Slide, please. So, Hezekiah Ward, who had built the house, had traded to a Mr. Collins, a homestead that Hezekiah owned on Herring Bay, for 35 acres of land at the end of what is now Rodgers Road. So this would be the approximate area of where the 35 acres would be. There was a house already there, but it later burned down. Mr. Collins was an oysterman and found the water too shallow, and I can attest to that, and wanted the deep waters of Herring Bay. Hezekiah's home didn't have enough land to farm, but he had access to deeper waters, so they just agreed to a trade, and they swapped it. Just a couple things I'll point out here since we have this map up. So this is going to be the source of the wood to build the house here, and this is one of the Howells farms. This is Frank Johnson's, which is Neely Howells Johnson's husband. So this is one of the house farms, and then the other three are here. Our Frank, John, Eliza. Eliza's house, by the way, is still standing, and as is Neely's house. These are the two houses that are still standing. The other two are gone. That one was torn down, and John Henry's house burned down. Slide, please. So here's a picture, actually, of Captain Frank and Cornelia Howells Johnson's house. That's over on Cape Ann. Hezekiah was a skilled carpenter as well as a farmer, so when the house on the land burned, he built another about 1885, and that stood until April 16, 2018. He used wood from oak trees from Franklin, Captain Frank Asbury Johnson, and Cornelia Neely Howells Johnson's Woods, is what is now Cape Ann, across Broadwater Creek. Neely was Naomi's great aunt, or John Henry Howells Sr.'s sister. And the house does still stand across the creek. Incidentally, Hezekiah must have also been a waterman in addition to a farmer and a carpenter, because I found a patent petition for him that was submitted in 1886 for an improved anchor. The application gives partial credit to Emil Hartje, another familiar name. He wrote in the application, "My invention relates to improvements in anchors and has for its object the production of anchors of such a construction that danger of losing the same when caught or entangled by some submerged object will be reduced to a minimum." Next slide, please. So Hezekiah constructed the new house of anhewn oak timbers in a Cape Cod style with medieval overhang gables. By the time we bought the house in 2012, it had long since been resided and the ornamentation of the gables was gone. The Wards lived in the house while their 6 children grew up.
Where?
What's that?
Where?
Yeah.
It's the whole house was 4 rooms, and those of you were in it. So it was 2 downstairs and 2 upstairs. So you're right, it would be a bit crowded. Their son, William Murray Ward, lived in the house with his bride, Susan Howells Ward, who was Thomas's cousin, until he decided to move to the Highlands, which was Lothian. The house was then rented several times until bought by Thomas Howells in 1917. Hezekiah Fisher Ward was born in Friendship and died in Churchton, likely at the Rodgers house. His wife, Sarah Elizabeth Rodgers Ward, who's pictured, Sarah was born in Shadyside and also died in Shadyside. She likely moved there after her husband's death. Hezekiah and Sarah both were married in November 1872 in Anne Arundel County, and she is also buried at St. James in Lothian. Their daughter, Laura Ward Rodgers, who who Naomi credited with passing on the lore of the history of the farms and the houses. She was friends with her. Slide, please. So Naomi reminisced about the attraction and beauty of the place was a huge oak tree, estimated to be over 300 years old, that grew on the point where the creek branches. A cable swing hung from a large branch, and many a good time was had on a Sunday afternoon by young and old as we swung out over the creek bank and up into the tree branches. A wooden bench partly circled the tree, and from there one could catch a cool bay breeze on a hot summer day and watch the moon rise over the water at night, making a patch of sparkling gold. She rued the day when on a stormy night lightning struck the old oak tree, which caused it to die, and then it was felled by Hurricane Hazel in 1954. Just looking at the size of the house, estimated that tree has to be at least 100 feet high and probably 90 feet across. It must have been huge. And incidentally, the land that tree sat on is now gone too. The land did erode back, and so there is another oak tree, but it's not nearly as big.
During Hazel, it took the top out of the tree and laid it down. If it had fallen to the house, it would have torn
Is
the
that
house
right?
up. And we figured that the roots were under the house. So it was a real blessing that Hurricane Hazel just topped it and laid
The
it
other
right
way.
down next to it.
Slide, please. So there was also a barn at the farm, but was long gone by the time we bought the property. Naomi recalled the old barn that stood by the road facing the driveway and garden, and the huge mud hole at the end of it that we kids would wade it in the spring and sled on the ice in the winter. The barn was built sturdily of hand-hewn oak logs and inside with flat boards on the outside. I do not know who built it. There was a corn crib, a stall for Buck and Ned, our horses, and a place for old Rose the cow. The buggy and wagon were kept inside, and the hay loft where if you were lucky you could find the hen's nest hidden in there. Slide, please. The house had 2 summer kitchens during its life. The first was an outbuilding that was destroyed by Hurricane Hazel. Naomi wrote, at one time a dug well was by the summer kitchen. There were rows and rows of bricks. The water a long way down was drawn up by a bucket on a rope. My father had an artesian well drilled near the shore. A dairy house was built over it, and the clear icy waters flowed continually through the building. It was kept at a depth of 3 inches, where milk crocks were placed to keep the milk from souring. In winter, Mother kept her canned fruit on the shelves as nothing froze in there. Outside, a keg was partly buried to catch the flow of water for the cattle to drink before it wandered along the marsh to the creek. In those days, electricity was unknown in this area. Food was kept in the dairy house until years later, we bought an ice box that had a 25-pound block of ice to keep the food in the house. Slide, please. So this delightful sketch on the left of the picture here was done by Edna and shows the dairy house, the old oak, and even the cable swing. And just by looking at this, you could tell that Edna really liked where she lived. It seemed like that she thought it was a fun place, almost written out like a playground. In 1937, at a cost of materials of $20.90, a porch and kitchen was added to the back of the house and was still there when we purchased the property. However, there was no running water by then, just electric. The old house never had indoor plumbing. The asphalt shingles also went on in 1937, with material and labors being $96.31. The asbestos siding was added in 1949 for $695, and that was the makeup of the house when we bought it in 2012.
We did have running water inside. She used to have a pump thing.
In the kitchen.
But Daddy put it in, gave her a hot water heater and a spigot. So
Right,
she-
in the kitchen that was
in the
attached to
kitchen,
the front.
But nothing else.
Right, but that was gone, I think that was in the 50s or 60s that dried up. I think,
I remember it always being, and remember the pump thing.
I remember the pumping too.
And there was one right out there too. Not far from. But I hated going to the outhouse.
I don't blame you.
And I would run home. Because too many times I was barefoot and it was a chicken yard to get to the outhouse. I didn't like that place.
And it was still there when we bought the property in 2012.
It was not used in a long time.
Slide, please. So before Thomas Owen's house died in 1949, he measured half of the farm into equal parts for each of his children, the south side along Broadwater Creek. So that's this part right here. The other half, sometimes known as Pasture Creek, was left as one parcel of land for all of them, but was later divided up into 4 parcels and sold. The last parcel was 3 acres sold in 1997 to the Merkel family, which is right here, for $75,000. Slide, please. So we said that Naomi inherited 1097 Rodgers Road as the eldest child of Thomas Howes when he died in 1949. Naomi's siblings each built houses soon after Thomas died on the lots that had been subdivided for them. John Howes built 1087 Rodgers in February 1950, and George Howes built 1085 Rodgers in the fall of 1950. Mary Elizabeth Boots Howes Rodgers and her husband, George Ellsworth Rodgers, built 1079 Rodgers Road in the fall of 1951. The Rodgers General Store was moved to their lot when Elle's father, John Henry Rodgers, died. Elle's used it as a saw sharpening business, and it's in the blue rectangle right here. We'll talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. Slide, please. So Mac and Naomi married in November of 48 and lived with Thomas until he died in July of 49. Son Alan was born in October 1955. The 3 of them lived in the house until Mac was hospitalized and died in 1997. Then just the 2 of them until 2012. Naomi and Alan then moved in with relatives due to the deterioration of the house and Naomi's failing vision and health. They very reluctantly put the last 2.62 acres of the property and the house up for sale. And we contracted to buy the property in March of 2012 and closed on the sale on July 30th, 2012. Naomi died just 3 weeks later on August 19th, 2012, at age 90. She spent all 90 years, except the last couple months, at her humble, beloved home on Rodgers Road. Perhaps Naomi said it best. It takes a heap of living in a house to make it a home. There has surely been a lot of living and dying in our home. Memories both good and sad. Truly it has been a home to a lot of people that lived here before Dad bought it, that lived here as a child, that liked to visit ever so often and tell me how it was then and share their memories of home. Slide, please. She had also held on to this poem, which I thought really captured her life at this house and on Broadwater Creek. There's a house whose rooms I know by heart, where I tended the garden and read my books, where dreams were dreamt and memories made, where children grew up and I grew old. There's a house where life was lived, a house where I belong. Slide, please. So the last area we're going to look at tonight are some select points of life in Churchton that were touched on while we're looking at the history of the Howells and their farms. So this is Tom Howell's oyster boat in 1945. Tom was both a farmer and an oysterman. His brother John Henry Robb Howells was a painter and a waterman. More than one trade was of course often the case, but waterman was very, very common. John Henry Robb Howells passed on his waterman trade to his son James Robert Howells, also known as Bobby Howells, who lived on Blaine Road along the south shore of Broadwater Creek. He was both a self-employed mason and a waterman. To my knowledge, the only active waterman living on Broadwater Creek today is Ed Howells. He is Bobby's son. Anybody know anything different than that? I haven't seen any other waterman other than Ed that's working there. His brother Chris was both a waterman and a mason, like his father, but gave up the waterman profession when it conflicted too much with his masonry business. Both men still live side by side on the south shore of Broadwater Creek, the only Howells still living on Broadwater Creek to my knowledge. Slide, please. So this is Tom Howell's oystering license from 1911. So at this point, he was still living on the Broadwater Creek farm with his family. He bought the Rodgers Road farm in 1917, but I thought the price of it was significant at $3.75, considering you could put a kitchen and a porch on a house for $20, and the asphalt roof for $96. So. Slide, please. So Churchton School. Churchton actually had their own school for some years, and Naomi described Churchton School as such. A two-room schoolhouse was built in Churchton about 1900 on land given by Mr. Simmons. 2 teachers taught grades 1 through 8. By 1929, all grades were one room with one teacher. The school was closed in 1933. Most of the scholars were sent to Shadyside or Tracy's schools. My mother got permission from the school superintendent, Mr. Fox, for my sister, my 2 brothers, and I to attend the new Deale School opened that year on Drum Point Road. Mr. Clayson Simmons, a relative of the one that gave the land for Churchton School, fixed up the building for his home. The last teacher that taught at Churchton School was Miss Nellie Chericks. So just some of you here may recognize some of your family members here, but this is Elizabeth Howells. This is Naomi. This is John Howells. George was too young to be in school at that time. This is Lester Simmons. He's the son of Clayson Simmons, who bought the house, or the school, to try and do his church. And we'll talk about Lester in just a moment in relation to other aspects. Slide, please. Here is the obituary of Nellie Chericks Noel, who taught at Churchton School in 1933 and stayed in the school system for 43 years as a teacher and eventually principal of Shadyside Elementary. The map shows Churchton School on the west side of Deale Churchton Road, a little north of the Franklin Manor Road intersection. Note that this was also still the segregation area, and a colored school is depicted on the corner of Deale Churchton Road and Rodgers Road. That lot is now occupied with a brick one-story ranch house. Naomi also mentioned a Broadwater school that existed in the area, but I couldn't find anything other than that notation on it. But she said that the Broadwater School closed. It was a one-room schoolhouse, and it actually moved to her Aunt Eliza Atwell's house, which is one of those farms along the Broadwater Point area. Slide, please. So as we mentioned, Clayton Simmons remodeled the schoolhouse for his home after the school closed in 1933. He owned the house until 1968, when he sold it to Doug and Helen Kohler. The Kohlers bought the house at 5430 Deale Churchton Road and added workshops to the back to conduct restoration projects, including very old cars such as the Ford Model A. Mr. Kohler told the Annapolis Capital in a July 1973 interview for the paper that when he bought the house, it still had folding wooden chairs and old textbooks in the house's loft. He said the old ornate pot-bellied stove, dated to 1901, was still there along with an old blackboard. The Kohlers sold the property in 1993, and it has also changed hands again since then. But it's interesting that in its third life, it was still being used to preserve history as they did the cars. Slide, please. I love these school pictures. Great posture, and they're so neat. I bet you could hear a pin drop during class. Of course, this is Deale School, and it's still there. It's now the front of the Elks Lodge on the west side of Drum Point Road, just south of Deale Road, right 2 blocks from here. Slide, please. Churchton's first church was Oakland Methodist Church at the corner of Muddy Creek and Chalk Point Roads. I could not find the exact date of the establishment. However, when Oakland Methodist Church built a new church in 1892, it coincided with the establishment of Cedar Grove Methodist Church, which is where we are this evening. And they offered to give their old building to Cedar Grove if they could move it to the new site at the corner of Mason Beach and Deale Churchton Roads. The building was cut into 4 sections and moved by ox carts and reassembled on the site and used for 20 years. Naomi Howes Nutwell was a member of the former Oakland United Methodist Church, where she served as secretary and historian. Slide, please. And Oakland Methodist Church today is still an active house of worship, but now served in the congregation of the Living Word Bible Church. Slide, please. General stores. Churchton had at least 3 general stores: Seidman's, Rodgers, and Dawson's stores. The Seidman store, depicted on the hand-drawn map on Deale Churchton Road just north of Franklin Manor Road and located at the site presently occupied by the laundromat, was operated by Harry Seidman. He had actually bought the store from another unknown operator. According to his granddaughter, Linda White, he had previously run another store in Baltimore, found that one was advertised for sale, and he bought it and moved down here. Bernard Seidman operated the store after his father. It was the largest of the Churchton stores and sold general merchandise and also had a gasoline concession. They would provide ice delivery to the area as well. Slide, please. There was also a general store on Rodgers Road, near the southeast corner of what is now Gunner Run Road. It was operated by John Henry Rodgers, father of Ellsworth Rodgers, who married Naomi's sister. His wife was Laura Ward Rodgers, the daughter of Hezekiah Ward. The Rodgers family had a farm next to or just northwest of where the Howes were. When John Henry died, Els moved the store to his home at 1079 Rodgers Road, now the Scholars. Els used the store building as a saw sharpening business initially, then a lawnmower repairs. The building is still at 1079 Rodgers, but now attached to the house and converted to 2 bedrooms and a bath by the skilled carpentry hands of Chuck Scala, a man of very many talents, who's here tonight. Slide, please. On the west side of Deale Churchton Road, at the intersection of Franklin Manor Road, was another general store operated by James Bertrand Dawson, a World War I veteran. The building dates to 1931 and is still there. This is the general store here. Next to it, and just a bit further from the road, is the Dawson home built in 1911 and added on to later. That property was inherited and owned by James Bertrand Dawson's daughter, Frances Dawson Seidman Simmons, until she passed in 2019. She had been married to Bernard Seidman, son of the Seidman store operator, and was also the daughter of the other store's operator. After Bernard died, she married Thomas Lester Simmons, the one that went to school with Naomi, who had gone to church and school with her, Lester served in World War II and was also a skilled carpenter and builder. He built many of the houses at Cape Ann and Shadyside. I think over 60 houses he built. The source of that was Linda Seidman, who was the daughter of Francis Dawson, Seidman Simmons. And she told me also that there was a Loretta Dawson, who was the first postmistress of Churchton. And where our current post office is in Churchton, there was a wood structure there, and that was on land donated by the Dawsons, and Loretta was the first postmistress. Slide, please. Past airfields in Churchton. Amazingly, not that long ago, this area had 3 airports. Deale Airport on Tracy's Creek, just north of the Deale Road Bridge, is still there and operational. But 2 other airports existed in the mid to late 20th century, having been created in the post-World War II era with a surplus of aircraft and pilots. The airports were the old-style brass strips. Slide, please. Shadyside Airfield was near where the Christopher's Fine Foods is today, from 1945 to 1970. You can still see the runways in this 2012 photo very clearly. Slide, please. And of course, Deep Creek Airport in Shadyside operated from 1950 to 1988. All the airports, as I said, were the old brass-style strips, but I believe they added to the longer runway here a little bit of gravel in their later years, runway 3-4. Deep Creek Airport eventually became Franklin Point State Park. So I know many of our citizens are familiar with Dick Johnson, a World War II hero who made his life here in Deale after the war and authored the book 25 Milk Runs, and I actually saw a couple of copies stacked there on the table. It's an excellent read about his early life during the Depression, his wartime experiences as a B-17 pilot, which was a tremendously difficult job, and then coming here and making his life for so many years and contributing to the community. But he talked in the book about operating out of Deep Creek Airport, and one humorous anecdote he recounted was being paid to tow a banner from Deep Creek. So just like they do at the beach where you have the meshing, and they'd put these block letters on, and Dick would do that to make extra money. And he was hired to promote the congressional candidacy of Larry Hogan, the father of our current governor, when he was running for Congress. So he rigged up the banner, Larry Hogan for Congress, and took off and had several successful runs and decided he could do it a little cheaper. So he used a piece of polyethylene, which is basically plastic, and painted Larry Hogan for Congress on it and took off from Deep Creek. Shortly after that mission started, the tail end of the banner broke off, and Dick said he finished the flight with a sign saying Larry Hogan for Con. Which I'm sure he was a bit chagrined but a bit amused. When I read that, I couldn't help but think how many politicians today have a banner like that in their honor flown. So, slide please. So that is our look tonight at this very small but amazingly beautiful community of Churchton and some of the incredible people that lived and died in the Broadwater Creek area. We spent a full 8 years building our home on Rodgers Road. I am certain that Hezekiah Ward, or many of the Howells, particularly John, could have done it faster and better. Throughout those years, though, our appreciation of the resilience, the sense of community, and incredible patriotism of the people, whether your name or that of your ancestors is Howells, Nutwell, Phipps, Rodgers, Ward, Ford, and so many others, only grew in our amazement of the sheer beauty and peaceful existence of Broadwater Creek was only heightened. We feel very fortunate to live here in the Churchton Deale community and on Broadwater Creek, and we cherish its history and heritage. It is indeed a special place. With that, I thank you for your time and attention. I'm happy to take questions. Anybody have any corrections or questions?
There was another area.
Was there really?
Yes, it was, the property now is a housing development. And a fellow had, I think he ran the College Park Airport. I think his name was Brinkerhoff. And, he and he had an airstrip in front of the house there. And the house was not on the water, but if you walked far enough, it would be back toward Rodgers Road where they have the new development back there. I don't know
Okay.
what those developments are called.
Between Broadwater Road and Rodgers Road. That community in between there.
No kidding.
Broadwater.
And it was just an airstrip for his plane.
So a
That's
private
all.
strip.
They came down on the weekend to this property. And
So
they just landed on that airstrip, that's all.
The,
It wasn't a very long airstrip.
the map shows that as being the Brundage Farm. Would that have been where it was?
In later years, it was owned by Ted Great. Now, I don't know what that development is called now. It's before you get to the post office. It's off to the right. It's, well, before you get to Rodgers Road.
Right.
That development there, and there was a flat strip of land.
We're gonna have to look it up to find out where it was.
Spyglass, is that what that's called? Spy-
Spyglass 1, Spyglass 2, Forester Road and Rodgers Road.
uh-huh.
Sounds like maybe Forester Road.
I don't remember anybody landing there, but this, yeah, they came down to the college park.
We haven't seen anybody land over there.
Too many houses down.
Yeah.
Any other questions or corrections? Yes, ma'am.
Do you have a picture, or does anyone have any of the old acres that Mr. House made? Was it a house that made that acre?
Oh,
That was-
it was Hezekiah Ward. So the question was, do we have any pictures of the anchors? And no. I just found when I was doing an internet search, and this patent came up when I Googled Hezekiah Ward, and it was clearly transposed from some other document. There was no pictures, but it did have references. See this picture, see that, or see this diagram, and so forth. So there definitely were. We could go down to the patent office and probably do a research on it, but I couldn't find out if it was ever approved. Just that there was a patent application, and it sounded like it was a good idea. Any other questions?
I want to know how you found the property.
How did we find the property? Very quickly, we decided that we were first looking for some vacation property, and then we thought, why would we buy vacation property when we can live someplace that's like vacation year round? And so we contacted a local realtor here, and we actually looked at his house, and which was for sale. It wasn't quite what we wanted, but he says, well, let me send you some lists this week. When this one was on the list, it had just come out, and I had to do a double, triple, quadruple take when I looked at it, because I thought, wow, this place looks perfect. So that's how we found it. Swartz Realty, right here in Church, or Deale. Anything else?
Well, thank
you very much.
so much for coming and